All right, let's see. It's May 2020. This is this Zoom thing. So welcome everybody to the 2020 MHCA conference. We're so glad you're here, except I don't see anybody. At least I look like a person and I don't look like an animal with a strange background. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and introduce some vendors to you. And can you guys even hear me? Is anybody even there? Holy smokes, look at my hair. I have got to get a haircut. I haven't had a haircut in months. Anyways, I just want to welcome everybody to the 2021 MHCA meeting, and we're not doing this on Zoom. All right, everybody, welcome to the 2021 keynote for the MHCA. And again, my name is Mark Roady, the Mark Roady. And because cowbell really signifies change, we're going to talk a lot about change today. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to change the name of that silly song. So that song was called Don't Fear the Reaper. We're going to change it to Don't Fear the Change, because we all went through an enormous amount of change in the last 18 months. Some of us, it was flying at us from 9 ways from Tuesday. And so again, we endured a lot of change and a lot of pain and a lot of joys and both. So I want to just make sure that we're focusing on, again, just talking about change. So how did I get here? And it was kind of a funny story. So most of you know last year, 2020, our meeting got postponed or canceled. But we had a board meeting and we decided, hey, we'll do it in October. So most of you probably don't know this was going to happen in October. And then as the pandemic raged on, we all met and we said, well, we can't do it in October either, so we're going to cancel it. But the problem we ran into is that we had already given a very large deposit to the hotel, and we were like, well, we'll just, and they told us, look, you can do it again in May, but I think that was the last time that they were going to let us do it. So we just decided as a board we were not going to cancel the meeting. And so we decided to go through with it, and we're like, whatever happens, happens. We're just going to do it. We're going to have fun. And so here we are today. So what happened is we're sitting in a board meeting, and I don't even know who it was, but it might have been Mikey Lars, but she's not here today. But anyways, somebody said, hey, who's going to do the keynote? Who's going to do all the talks? And so I believe somebody said, well, Mark, why don't you do the keynote? And I said, sure, I'll do the keynote. And then I finished the meeting, and I started driving back to my office in Scottsdale. And then I started going, oh no, what have I done? I started feeling sick to my stomach. I was sweating. I was like, I can't believe I just did this. I overcommitted. I'd never given a keynote before. So what was I going to say? And based on everything that happened in 2020, I mean, how do you, again, change flying on us 9 ways from Tuesday, what would we talk about? So I pulled into my office, and I got my team up front here. I've got an amazing team. And so I pulled in and I said, hey guys, you're not going to believe this. I totally screwed up. I committed to doing the keynote speech at the MHCA meeting. And I'm just going to see if I can get out of it. And they said, what do you mean? This is part of our culture, our core value. Our core values. And I said, what do you mean? I mean, what am I going to talk about? What would even be interesting based on what happened? And one of the team members said, why don't we talk about our company culture? I said, well, who the heck wants to learn about our company culture? I mean, we have a very quirky culture, and we do bring a lot of cowbell. We'll talk about that. But, so we started kind of brainstorming with the team. And we said, well, can we come up with something that's informative, relevant to our industry, a little funny? Hopefully you guys enjoyed that clip. I certainly, every time I watch it, I just laugh. It's hilarious. And then also, though, we had to have a seriousness to it because, again, we endured a lot of change in the last 18 months. So it had to be informative, relevant, serious, and funny, kind of all at the same time. So I got to have more cowbell at MAR companies is really just signifies constant and never-ending change. So Bruce Dickinson, as you saw in the video, he kept demanding more cowbell from his band members. He said, I need more cowbell. I got to have more cowbell. And what we found is that if you bring more cowbell in your businesses, your mobile home parks, what you find is that things do get better. It's a small change that leads to a larger result. And so if any one of you were to come to our office in Scottsdale and walk in on any given day, we ring the cowbell a lot. I talked to Jeff yesterday, he was ringing the cowbell. So whenever we lease an RV space, for instance, we ring the cowbell. When we sell a home, we ring the cowbell. When we kill some sort of process that's been slowing us down or making us inefficient, we ring the cowbell. Whenever we buy a mobile home park or an RV park, we ring the cowbell. In fact, Monday, before I drove over here, we just put another property in escrow and we waived our contingency, so we were ringing cowbell like crazy. And again, we kind of find that when you're making these small changes, that they end up being very large, they end up having a large result in the future. So cowbell is just part of our culture. That's really what it is. But it comes from something a little bit more defined than that. So we have 7 core values in our company. I'm not going to share those core values with you, but I'm going to share one. And that core value is, we call it CKC. And CKC basically is a little acronym. And the first C stands for curious. And so we want everyone on our team to constantly be curious. And so I'm going to encourage you to be curious the next 2 days. So when you're walking by one of the exhibitors, don't be that guy or girl that goes, oh, I just got to get a cup of coffee and a donut. I'm not talking to that guy. Let's not do that, right? Let's go talk to them. Let's get curious. Let's learn what they have to say. And if you're going to one of the presentations and one of the talks, before you go, get curious first and go, what am I going to learn? What could possibly this person tell me that would make my business better, or my mobile home parks better? And then the second thing is, or the amazing thing that happens, is that when we get curious, we get this thing called knowledge. That's the K. We start to get smart. So we get curious first, then we get knowledge. The problem is that that's where most of us stop. Most of us get curious a lot, we get a ton of knowledge, and then we fail to take the next step, or the final C, which is called commit. So we have to now take some action based on what we learned. And so this is really, again, a fundamental core value. And what we do for fun in our office, the CKC really is just ring more cowbell. We just keep ringing the cowbell, right? So whenever we're making a small change, we just ring the cowbell. So never-ending change, again, is the message. So what is it at a really basic level? If we were to, we're in the mobile home or RV park industry, but if we really define what it is we do on a very basic level, it's that we provide shelter. So we provide shelter. Our residents are screaming, give me shelter, we give them shelter. And those of you that went to my talk 2 years ago, I used to be in the healthcare business. And I was in the operating room for 20 years. And again, so I was wearing masks way before anybody in this room knew what a mask was. And anyways, what ended up happening is that I learned a lot being in the operating room about efficiency and about process. But what I also learned was that as human beings, we have basic needs. And one of the number one basic needs we have, and if you guys have ever watched these shows like Survivor, or some of these endurance shows where they drop you off in the middle of nowhere, if we were to all get dropped off in the middle of the desert and we had to stay there for 20 days to figure out how to survive, the number one basic human need is air. So we all need air first. That's the first thing we're going to seek. If we don't have air, we don't last very long. So, but after we get air, the next thing we do is we kind of look around and go, I don't want to be dinner for some animal that might come and eat me. So I've got to seek shelter. So the next thing we would do is we would say, well, it's getting dark, we better find a place to sleep. And then after that, of course, we start looking for water, we start looking for food. And then the fifth real basic human need is really why we're here today, and that's that we all want companionship, human companionship. I mean, again, I kind of made that little silly video about the Zoom stuff, but we've got to really interact with one another. So we got to have air, we got to have shelter, food, water, and human companionship. So I've got some ground rules for today, just 3. Number 1 is, I want you to CKC this. I want you to be Bruce Dickinson for the next 2 days for your shelter business. And what I want you to do is I want you to just keep ringing more cowbell. So when you go to a talk or you talk to an exhibitor, just keep thinking to yourself, how do I make my business better? That's number one. Number two is your residents are screaming, give me shelter. So let's give them shelter, but let's do it better than we've ever done it before. Let's be the best at it that we can be. And the reason I say that is shelter's been around since the beginning of time. So we want to make sure that when we're providing shelter, we're constantly improving that. And then the last thing I want to say is, if you come back a year from now and you decided not to change anything, you got curious, you got some knowledge, but you didn't make any changes, then you really got to ask yourself, why are you here? Because, again, so much happened in the last 18 months, or 24 months. And so there's a ton of things that happen in each and every one of your lives and your businesses that you can possibly share with others and learn from others on how we can do things better. So that's really, in a very simple light, what Ring More Cowbell is. So a Greek philosopher once said, the only constant in life is change. And again, no other time in history has this been true. And just to kind of prove a point, at one point in time, this was the most advanced automobile in the world. It was a 2-horsepower engine, and this thing was amazing. Okay? This was one of the most advanced aircrafts in the world. And musical performances were sometimes considered vulgar and obscene by parents that had young daughters. But what would be possible if nothing changed? Well, fast forward to today, in 2020, we have cars that drive themselves. We have aircraft that flies themselves and even lands themselves for you pilots in the room. And of course, musical performances are still considered vulgar and obscene by parents with young daughters. So what does this have to do with trailer parks? And for those of you in the room that just gasped because I said trailer park, come to my booth later and I'll tell you why I call it trailer park. But that's what I call them. I call them trailer parks. And I'm proud of them, by the way. So I want to do a little history. So again, we're going to talk about relevance to our industry. And in 2013, there was a professor in California, and that professor decided he was going to kind of go on the road. But I don't think anyone here was around in 1913. But in 1913, he's like, I'm going to go on the road. There's no Holiday Inn Express. There's no Hampton Inn. So, light's flashing. So anyways, he decides to make this little thing travel trailer. It's called the Traveling Landau. And this is actually the very first travel trailer that was ever invented. And what happened after this, because this guy was bold, he was a pioneer, he rang More Cowbell. What happened next is 30 years later, the travel trailer industry exploded. This is in 1936, and the camper and motorhome industry became one of the fastest growing industries in America. And by 1937, the industry was so large that they had to form an association, just like our association. And so the RV travel trailer business, they came first, but there's some good news for us mobile park people. Hold on. In the 1940s, when World War II happened, the government had a problem because they had all these newly enlisted servicemen, and now they have to figure out how to house these soldiers. And so what they did is they came in and they said, we're going to take 1 or 2 or 3 designs, and we've got to start creating housing for the soldiers. And this became really the first mobile home park. And this was back in the 40s, and this was kind of when our industry started to take off. And again, due to World War II. And then, as we kind of progressed through time in the 50s, well, this is the late 40s, we started getting these innovative designs. And as the design started changing, again, more cowbell, how do we make it better? And again, the travel trailer industry now is still raging. And then if we fast forward to the 50s, that's when things get really interesting. So this is the 41-foot deluxe tri-level 6 sleeper. And this was the one of a kind, and this was early in the 50s. And what ended up happening was there was a builder by the name of Elmer Fry, and Elmer decided that he wanted to make a wider home. So all of our homes at the time that were being manufactured were all 8 feet wide. And Elmer said, you know what, I'm going to make a 10-foot wide home. And when he made a 10-foot wide home, what he did is he created a whole new, almost a whole new industry, because now we have a hallway, we've got some privacy, and this thing really starts to feel like a home. And this was the beginning of what is called the golden age of our industry. And so if we were to go talk to, wow, that is crazy. If we were to go talk to Elmer Fry back in the 50s when he was designing this, and we sat down with him and said, hey, what were you thinking when you started to make a 10-foot home? He would have probably said, hey, I put my pants on, one leg at a time, except when they're on, I make wider homes. And so he did. And interestingly, every other builder followed. Then in the 1960s, again, when somebody's a pioneer and they ring a lot of cowbell, they're kind of the front runner, and then people start to follow. But now what they did is everyone's making 10-foot wide homes, but their only solution is, well, we'll make them longer. So we went from 41 foot to 45 feet to 51 feet to 53 feet. And hey, we'll put an in kitchen on some of these homes, so they started expanding them out. But guys, I gotta have more capital. So in 1961, the Roadliner Corporation came out with the very first double wide. And this is when the mobile home park business gets to say we gave something to the RV business, because this actually was a single wide home that was 8, 9, or 10 feet wide. And what happened is that they actually had a slide out. So once the home was in the park, there was an electronic slide out, just like we see today in an advanced travel trailer or RV. And that was like a little slide out that they would set after the home was set. So this was really cool for its time. And if we were to go through, I just want to say something else. There was a slide I put in here, but it didn't show up. But I would also say this: in the 60s, if you lived in a mobile home park in the 60s, you were really cool. In fact, Elvis Presley actually lived in a mobile home park back in the 60s in Memphis. And it was just a cool thing to do. It was really the golden age of the mobile home and era. And if you were to drive through a park in the 60s, this is kind of what you'd see. You'd see families, you'd see people, people, again, walking around with their kids, riding bikes and trikes. And if we throw some color on this, this was a park back in the early 60s. And it looks very, similar, honestly, to some of the stuff we have today, except for a couple things. But we had homes in the 40s, we had a ton of homes in the 50s, and we have these really cool new designs of the 60s that were coming into these parks. And again, we already know what happened, because none of us, I shouldn't say none of us, but most of us weren't there when this was developed. But when this property was developed, somebody rang a lot of cowbell, because they drove through this thing a couple years later and said, I hate seeing stuff under these cars, under these homes. So somebody invented skirting, and a new industry is born based on what was happening, again, by ringing more cowbell and making changes. So the 60s were really the boom time for mobile home parks. 1955 to 1975, in that 20-year window, is when almost every mobile home park was developed in the United States. The problem is we had all these innovative designs from the 50s, and the 60s, and we didn't have any place to put them. So people were developing parks all over the United States. We got to have a place to put these. And again, this was when our industry was literally on fire and was raging. But meanwhile, in the 60s, it was also, as a country, we were changing like crazy. And so, one of the things I want to point out is in 1955, we had the Vietnam War. And it ended in 1975, but the issue with the Vietnam War was we were fighting a communist regime, and all through the 60s, there was extreme division amongst Americans. 3 million people died in this conflict. 58,000 of them were Americans, and it deeply divided our country. And I always looking at history and comparing present versus the past. And I just feel like we are still in a battle fighting an enemy that we can't see, called COVID. And when we first got attacked, we didn't have any arsenal, we didn't have anything, we didn't know what this thing was. So there's an interesting parallel. And then 1968, we elected a president, President Nixon. He was a Republican. He defeated George Wallace and Hubert Humphrey. And this was really a redefining of of politics back then, because in the 1930s we had the New Deal coalition with Teddy Roosevelt, and that was when Nixon got elected, all of the Republican Party and everything started to change. And so what ended up happening is, as you guys know, he did get impeached in 1973. But does this sound familiar? We've kind of lived through this, so we can do it again. Martin Luther King, he actually did the March on Washington in 1963, and he had about 300,000 people that came to the Lincoln Memorial. And this is when he gave his I Have a Dream speech. And then a couple of years later, in 1965, he took 25,000 people and he marched 50 miles into Selma. And this was really the beginning of the Voting Act rights of 1965. Again, a lot of controversy and turmoil back in the day. Scientifically speaking, in 1969, we had two astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, who went to the moon for the first time. First humans to ever go to the moon. And about 6 hours later, Neil Armstrong jumped out of that lunar module, and he was the first man to walk on the moon. And this is when he famously said, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." He just rang a heck of a lot of cowbell. And some of you may not know or not know, in 1969, we had 500,000 people that marched on the Capitol, and they were protesting the Vietnam War. This is called Moratorium March, and it's considered to be the largest anti-war protest in American history. And just again, a historical parallel, there was a General Grant Coates. He was assigned to riot duty that week in the Capitol. And so what he ended up doing is he's looking outside with all his comrades going, "Uh-oh, what are we going to do? There's like 12 of us and there's 500,000 of them. What are we going to do?" We've been through this before. And because of all this pain and friction and violence that's going on in the 60s, when our industry was booming, we started to see the peace and hippie revolution, and this was Woodstock, and there was about 400,000 people that went to Woodstock, New York. And this was the beginning, what they called it, is the countercultural revolution. So we're sick of the war, we're sick of all this stuff going on, we're going to sing music and be peaceful. And for the most part, Woodstock, a lot of people got really stoned and high, and they were doing LSD, but for the most part, it was a very peaceful concert. And again, it was just society speaking out. There was tons of division at this time. And the Rolling Stones decided that Woodstock was so successful that they were going to have a Woodstock West, if you would. So what they ended up doing was they decided in December 6th of 1969 that they were going to have a concert, but they had a problem. Their venue got canceled. And when their venue got canceled, they didn't have a place to go, so they rallied really quick, and they said, well, we'll get another place to do it, which happened to be the Altamont Speedway. The problem with the Altamont Speedway is the stage was kind of down in the pit. And so they hired, you see on the bottom of their flyer, they hired the Hells Angels to be their security agent. Sounds like a smart thing to do, right? And the Hells Angels, and what was really interesting is they decided to pay them in beer. So they're like, hey guys, we'll give you a bunch of beer if you just be our security. These are a bunch of tough dudes, right? And so what happens is that when you have a bunch of tough dudes that are drinking a lot of beer with 400,000 people, it didn't turn out to be so peaceful. Some people lost their lives in this. there was a lot of a lot of rioting going on at this concert. It was supposed to be a peaceful concert. It was supposed to be the Woodstock West. And the other thing that's really interesting is the same day that the Rolling Stones did this concert, they released one of their most iconic albums, and that's the album Let It Bleed. And Let It Bleed was, again, one of their most iconic albums. And the number one song on that album was a song called Gimme Shelter. And that's what we do. We give people shelter. So being kind of a history buff and a music buff, I said, I wonder how this song was written. So I started researching it. And Keith Richards, it's kind of an interesting story. Keith Richards was really down and out. Again, it was dark times back then in the late 60s. And he was in his apartment. And his girlfriend at the time was having an affair with Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger was in the United States. He was looking out the window. This huge storm started coming. And it was just, the way he describes it is that it was just blowing like hell. People's umbrellas are getting ripped out of their hand, and all these people are scattering, running for shelter. And so he wrote the first verse of the song. He said, "Oh, a storm is threatening my very life today." Hey, that sounds kind of cool. He strummed a little more. If I don't get some shelter, oh yeah, I'm going to fade away. And that was the beginning of the song. That was it. And it was just, just two lyrics, two lines. When Mick Jagger got back to London, they sat down and they said, "Hey, we got to keep writing the song." But Mick Jagger's like, we got to write about all this crazy stuff that happened in the '60s or the late '60s. And so they started talking about murder, rape, violence, fires, rioting, protests, the war. And so this became known as an unbelievably dark song. But it also is one of their most iconic songs ever. Fast forward to today, in a post-COVID world, again, shelter's never been more important. I mean, again, going back to that song, it sounds familiar to me because we were all running for shelter. We were running for shelter. We're like, we personally were running for shelter, and our residents were saying, "Give me shelter," and we were literally fleeing to make sure that we were going to be safe. And so shelter, again, second basic human need, is absolutely vital. And so again, if I were to ask each of you individually and say, what do you think the most impactful thing of 2020 was? I would guess most of you, and I know I would say that was COVID-19. We're going to remember this for a long time. But I also want to let everybody know that there was a lot of stuff going on in 2020 that was some related and some unrelated to COVID-19. I don't know if you guys remember murder hornets. If you have murder hornets chasing you, you definitely want to seek shelter. We had fires in the West Coast. We had sports that immediately ended and stopped. We had governments around the world, again, blocking people down and saying, stay inside. We had floods on the east coast of the country, floods and hurricanes. We were developing a vaccine for COVID. We had a march on the Capitol. We elected a new president. We lost a basketball player, Kobe Bryant, his daughter, in a plane crash. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, and a new Supreme Court justice got appointed by President Trump, which caused more division. We had George Floyd. We had a lot of division, a lot of similarities similar to what we saw in the late 60s. That's a lot of change, guys. It's a ton of change. And in 2021, I predict, because we went through such a rapid change, that we're going to see even more change now. It's going to just start accelerating. So again, we have to ring cowbell. We have to figure out how we're going to change our businesses so that we don't get left behind. So what needs to change? This is kind of funny. So, not funny, but it's just the way I perceive things. So here we are, 2021, May. Arizona has been open for really open for about the last 2 months. And I hear a lot of people tell me, oh, Mark, it's finally getting normal again. What I do is, again, I'm kind of a logical thinker. I go, what does that mean? What does it mean to be normal? And I'm here to say, if you're waiting for normal to come back, like, oh, I can't wait to go back to the way it was in 2018, 2019, I think we're in big trouble. If that's what we're really going to do, if we're going to just hope we go backwards, we're going to get smoked. We can't go backwards. We got to continue to go forwards. And again, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but normal, in my opinion, is never coming back. We all approach normal in our own way. What's normal for you might be abnormal for you, might be unheard of for someone else. So I just hear it a lot. Things are getting back to normal. Things are getting back to normal. So we have the opportunity to change now. And what I find is things are just ticking along and just moving along slow. Change is kind of painful. People don't like it. But when everything changes at once, and we used to talk about, in our weekly meetings in our office, what's going to change this week? What game am I playing? I was playing football yesterday. Now I'm playing basketball. Now I'm playing tennis. But I have a football uniform on. I'm trying to play badminton. We just literally, things were just constantly changing. And when you have this much change that happens this fast, what ends up happening is now is the best time for you to change something or a lot of things in your businesses, because we have the opportunity to do it. And I don't think anyone's going to notice. They're not going to go, oh my gosh, they changed something, because everything's changing. Excuse me. So I read a book, a great book, and it's called Atomic Habits. And this is a book by James Clear. And the way he kind of started off the book was interesting. He says a lot of us have goals. So we pick goals, and we usually pick them in January, and then we figure out how we're going to achieve those by the end of the year. But he made a really good point. He said the two players in the Super Bowl, the two players in the national championship basketball game have the exact same goal. Their goal is to win the championship, but only one of them gets to do it, not both. So what he does is he talks about systems versus goals. So we all fall to the level of our systems. And so he talks about in the book how to get 1% better every day. And what he means by that is that we want to slowly make progress, not try to get 50% better in a week, because that's exhausting. So we want to get 1% better every day. And that helps obliterate some of these bad habits, and it also helps magnify and intensify all of our good habits. So yesterday, I saw this live out firsthand. I ended up golfing with Chris and Bryce and Cameron, and they were going, hey Mark, if you would just change your club face 2 millimeters, we wouldn't have to be out in the desert with rattlesnakes and javelinas and cholla cactuses looking for your golf ball. And so again, a small change equals a very, very large result. And so, by the way, we're proud of this. We're first. We were first yesterday. We won. We're the first last place team. We didn't put our score up there. But again, small changes equal big results. And so what I want to now talk about is some things in our business that we started doing in 2016. And again, I'm not saying these are things you should be doing or things that you should consider, but they're things we're doing now. And I promise you, a year from now, we probably will be doing things different, because we are continually innovating and changing. And the first one is, this is kind of the old school, I consider it old school in our business, is we have paper leases. So if the resident comes in, we have to sit down across the table from the manager, we have to sign a lease, and we have to sign a paper lease, and then after they sign it, we have to make a copy of that lease, and we have to stick it in the file, and give one to the resident, and so on and so forth. And then if there's an issue with the attorney, we have to take it back out of the file, put it in the scanner, send it to an attorney, so it's just a lot of work. Well, we don't do that in our company. We haven't done this in years. 100% of our documents are all e-signed documents. Our residents, or prospects I should say, sign leases wherever they are. They sign it on their phones, they sign it on their computers, they sign it if they're a passenger in a car driving down I-10. just sign them wherever they are. They don't need to be in our office. Another biggie that we see in mobile home parks and RV parks is that we've got to read utilities. So a lot of us have master metered electric, water, and gas. And so kind of the old method is we get a piece of paper and a pen. We have our managers go out and start reading these meters, and we have to write the numbers down. Then we go back to an office, then we fill them out in a spreadsheet, and hopefully they don't transpose the number. And this is just kind of a laborious task. And again, we don't do this in our company. We do everything on a tablet. So if we're going to manually read that meter, it goes on a tablet, and it automatically updates our software. And if there's one of the sponsors here, which is Metron, which we're trying for the first time. Again, CKC, ring some cowbell. This is a meter that reads itself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it will send us the reading whenever we ask it to. Violations are big in our business. So I was walking down the street, and Marty had a mattress in his driveway. Can't have that. So take a picture, walk back to the office. Then there's two residents that are talking to you about rent. So we're getting delayed. Oh my gosh, I forgot Marty had a thing. I gotta go back and take another picture. And then we gotta fill out this 1430, and then I gotta print it. Oops, but he's not home. He's a mean guy. I don't want to hand deliver this thing, so I'm gonna certify it. Now I gotta fill out a green slip. I have to go to the post office. We don't do that. What we do is my entire field staff and even me, I have my entire company on a cell phone, on a smartphone. And I would guess, I might be wrong, but I would guess that every single one of you in this room has a smartphone. So the capacity is there. Another biggie in our business is checks. Well, we got to collect rent, and residents have to pay us, bring a check into the office, or they have to bring us a money order. And all the parks that I've ever bought, and all the parks that I've been in, they have this big sign in the office: no cash. We don't accept cash. Only checks or money orders. And the problem with checks is that, the other problem with checks is that when you have work done at your property, you have to send a check to a vendor. And so, again, in our company, we haven't done that. We don't accept checks from residents, and we actually electronically send checks to our vendors. And one of the reasons is that we don't like going to the bank. And what we learned, or at least what I perceive I learned in 2020, was that banks will probably be obsolete in 2025. I can Venmo any one of you money right now when I'm giving this talk. I don't have to have a bank intercede in that transaction. I don't have to get a piece of paper from you, hand deliver it somewhere else. And so I just feel that banks are going to eventually become obsolete because technology is making them obsolete. So again, we don't go to the bank. But what we do, we accept Visa, MasterCard, a savings account, checking account, debit cards. And for those of you that don't accept cash, we do accept cash. We just don't accept it in our office. If somebody wants to pay us with a wheelbarrow full of pennies, we will let them do that. They just have to take it to Walmart or a Fry's grocery store, where they can then take it to the money department there, where they get money orders, and they can pay rent. And the minute it gets paid, it's automatically in their ledger. They show zero balance. And I don't know about you, but I don't shop at 11:59 p.m. But if somebody pays their rent at 11:59 p.m. at Walmart with a wheelbarrow full of pennies, they're going to be on time. I don't need anybody in the office to collect that check. Same with vendors. We want to make sure when we get an invoice from a vendor that it gets processed and then we send them a check immediately. Now, it's up to them when they want to cash it, but we email them a check. We don't send them a paper check. We've had disasters where we send a check and the check doesn't ever get there. I personally don't think the post office is reliable. Now, I know there's probably no one in this room that has a double data entry debit credit ledger like this, but I actually bought my very first part. This was the accounting system. And we absolutely don't use that. I hope none of you do either. But what we do is we use software. Particularly, we use Rent Manager software. and rent manager runs our entire back office, basically our entire company. And so we have all these other softwares that will bolt onto this. And so again, they're a sponsor of the meeting, and again, we've just had phenomenal success with their product. And we just, like I said, it's very, very easy to use, and it's just made us, again, mobile. Something new we've been trying, we did this about 2 years before COVID, is that again, when you have a mobile home park, you have to have somebody in the office because somebody might show up and they might want to go see a home. And we have to have somebody just say, well, let me take you in the golf cart, take you out to the house and show it to you. And so you spend 30 minutes with them and they say, this house is amazing. And they come back to your office and they go, oh, by the way, I hit somebody in the head with a hammer and had a felony. And so you just wasted a whole half hour, right? Well, again, we don't show homes this way. We use a piece of software that pre-qualifies the resident before we even interact with them. And after they get pre-qualified, so in other words, if they don't have 6 pit bulls or whatever, they get approved to see a showing. Then they have to send us a picture of their driver's license through the app. And once they do that, then we let them see the house. A few minutes before they get to the house, they get a text with a unique code so they can get in the house. And once they're there, they can then go into the house and they can look at it on their own term. My entire team is here today. We're showing houses today. I don't need a human being to be there to show a house. We've had 0 issues with this, and it works really great. And when you're doing a self-guided rental tour, I actually shopped apartments. When COVID hit, a lot of housing businesses, apartments and mobile home parks and RV parks, I drove by a very large, if I said the name of it, you guys all recognize it, a very large RV park. Go away, don't come in, we're closed. And our phone was ringing off the hook. And we took all those calls. We do self-guided tours, so there's, again, a very, very minimal risk of getting sick from your manager's side or from a resident if you're seeing the house on your own. So we've been doing this since 2018. COVID didn't even faze us. Keys, a lot of managers, I'm talking to you, you'll have this big lanyard on the side of your belt, kind of like this crazy thing I'm wearing here. And it's heavy, and it's got 29,000 keys on it. And we got to use that to open the clubhouse and the laundry room. And we got to use it to, open any type of amenity that we have. And if you have park-owned homes, we always lose the keys. The resident moves out and takes the key. Now we got to go rekey the doors when they move out anyways. We don't do keys. Again, we use software, we use technology that integrates with Rent Manager. And we literally, I can open any door, any park-owned home door. I can open my laundry facility. Again, right now while I'm talking to you, I don't have to physically be at the property. And then I kind of saved this one for last. I believe, and I'm going to talk I'm going to talk to park owners and I'm going to talk to managers. I'll talk to managers first. I believe human beings are extraordinary. And what I mean by that is, since every one of us in this room is extraordinary, we should be doing extraordinary things. But what happens a lot of times is that we do mediocre things that technology or a robot can do for us. And I remember back in the early 90s, when technology was really starting to take a foothold, people would always say, oh, technology replaces people. Technology doesn't replace people if you're extraordinary. And so for you park managers, I showed you guys a ton of technology. And I'm not saying this is the right way to do it, and I'm not even going to claim that I'll be doing this 12 months from now, but it's the way we do things now. And again, from a process perspective, we don't want people doing things that can be automated or that a robot or a machine can do. We want humans doing extraordinary things. And if you're a park owner in the room, and you're having your manager go to the bank, you're having your manager go to the post office, and you're having your manager fill out a bunch of paper, and you're having your manager sign leases, and you're having your manager go to the Home Depot to get 5 new keys cut, he or she is way more valuable than that. They're extraordinary. So let's give them the tools that they can so they can be extraordinary. So again, we don't have in-office, we kind of call it remote property management. We don't have in-office staff that does this because again, most of you would agree if you're a manager, you're waiting for that problem to come to you. And if you're and so some days you have a lot of problems, some days you have none. But what we like to do is go where the problems are, not wait for the problem to come to us. And again, we want to make sure we're spending more time, again, out with our residents. So we're in the field. And again, this was an old slide, but we actually use a tablet. So we literally make sure that, again, we're communicating with our residents. We call it resident relations, not park managers. Some of you still may have this. This is what we used to do with vendors, right? This was the vendor Rolodex. For those of you that are really young in the room, you probably don't know what this is. It's like an 8-track cassette tape thing. You've probably never seen one of these before, but they still exist. I've still seen them. And this is where you go find that business card from that guy you met 5 years ago. And it does. It looks like this. We don't do that. Again, we use an internet voice over IP phone system that plugs into Rent Manager. Every single call that we make, every single call that we receive are recorded, and so we can use them for sales training purposes, we can use them for legal purposes, and it's extremely, extremely efficient. And like I said, it's been really, really good for us. For the RV folks, for people that own RV parks, or a lot of people still are. If you go to your website, people are calling you. And they go, I want to make a reservation. I want to stay for 5 nights. I want to stay for a month. I want to stay for 3 months. That's okay. We still do that. But what I found is that a lot of people, and I have a lot of friends, and actually Brittany has an RV, and she's traveled a lot in RV, and she's like, I don't want to call anybody. I want to book an RV space wherever I am. If I'm driving down I-10, if I'm sitting in a restaurant, that's where I want to book my RV space. So again, we don't use the we discourage the phone call if we know that the robot or the technology can do it. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of people that like booking their RV space in the convenience of themselves. I want to do it on Sunday afternoon. Well, your office is closed on Sunday afternoon. They don't want to call. They want to just book it online. And then again, plus 55 parks. This may be a little outdated, but I would guess that in most plus 55 parks, some managers are still doing newsletters. And the problem with newsletters is you don't really know how many people are reading them. You don't know how effective they are. They take a long time to write, and they're still made out of paper. So again, we don't do that. But what we do is we use social media like crazy. The other night at a board meeting, Tom Stapley was sitting next to me, and Tom had mentioned, the goal is to get your Google rankings up to a 4+, or 4 or better. And you do this through social media. So you have Instagram, you have Facebook, you have, we don't do TikTok yet, but I heard that's the new rage. So, but you use social media because you can engage with so many more people so much more quickly. So that's really, again, a good way to reach your residents and reach your future residents. So what's holding you guys back, or what's holding even me back? And I would say that again, we look at what's happening with our current events, and we go, well, I wish I could do something with that election. I wish I could do something with that COVID. I wish I could do something, but this technology stuff is confusing. I don't even know if it works. And every time I try to use it, I don't. Mark, we can never do what you do. My residents don't have emails. And I'm telling you, yes, they do. So, going back to Cowbell, now's the time to take a risk. Now is the time. A lot of change happened, and after you take the risk, you're going to ring some cowbell. And the cool thing about CKC, or Cowbell, as we refer to it, is that it gives you a system, it gives you a measure. And sometimes you write a really cool song. You're like, ring More Cowbell. That song's amazing. Sometimes the song doesn't sound that good. And when the song doesn't sound that good, you get to go CKC all over again. You get to get curious, you get to get knowledge, and then you get to change again. And so again, it's just never-ending change. So again, we kind of talked about this. The only constant in life is change. And I think as human beings, we don't necessarily we don't dislike change. We just dislike people trying to change us. We like change. I mean, I personally do, but I think most of us, if you're honest with yourself, you'll try something new, but we just don't like to be changed. So I want to just take you down one more little musical, again, music and history. And music, again, music tells us a story. And this is a headline from 1959. This was a tragic day. It was a plane crash in Iowa. And this is when Buddy Holly, Big Bopper, and Richie Valens were killed in a plane crash. And there's a famous song, you all know the song, I'm not going to sing it because I don't sing. But there's a famous song that was written about this headline, and it's called The Day the Music Died. But we all know the music didn't die. Music continually changes and evolves. And so, what I found, and again, I'm going to be a little personal, but what I found is that when I talk to people and I ask them, what kind of music do you like? What I find most of the time is that when you started high school, you were probably 14, and from 14 to about 22, you're changing rapidly. I was a late bloomer. I have a May birthday. I just had a birthday a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, I guess. So I was a late bloomer. So I started school when I was just a very, very young. I just turned 14. And when you're a late bloomer, I was literally a boy. I was a little boy. And 4 years later, I was driving a car, I was shaving, and I was dating a girl. That's a lot of change in a 4-year time. Plus I went from being small to being, I grew about 1.5 feet. So there's a ton of change going on during that time in our life. And for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, that's also a time when we don't look at the news. We don't go, I wonder what's going on Fox News or on CNN. I wonder what's going on. When you're that age, you don't care. You're just like, play some songs, let's go have fun. And I think adults, as we get older, we get uptight about things. I think kids are like, whatever, I just want to have fun. And so that time in life is very influential for us. And so again, if you went to high school in the 60s, you probably like the Beatles, you might like Bob Dylan, Mr. Brown there, or the Rolling Stones. And if you went to high school in the 70s or college, you might like Elton John, you might like Stevie Wonder, Led Zeppelin, or the Bee Gees. And for those of you that did go to high school in the 70s, because I did, late 70s, who didn't like disco? Come on, disco was the coolest thing. No one's going to admit to that. But wearing those blue bell-bottom pants at the skate rink and jamming out to Staying Alive, that was some good living right there, guys. And then in the 80s, Michael Jackson, Van Halen, Madonna, Bruce Springsteen, a very diverse mix of music in the 80s. And then again, More Cowbell, we got Mariah Carey, we've got Tupac, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and as you kind of go through time, we get Usher, for you country fans, Alan Jackson. The boy bands were just starting to go crazy, NSYNC and the Strokes. And then 2010, we've got Kanye West, Drake, Bruno Mars. Taylor Swift absolutely ranks in cowbell. She went from being a #1 country artist to a #1 pop artist. So she kind of lived in those two different genres. And then in 2020, we have Weeknd, Luke Combs, Dua Lipa, and these are Juice WRLD. These are the current bands of today. And so guys, 1969, Hey Jude from the Beatles was the #1 hit, #1 Billboard hit, and it lasted for 9 consecutive weeks. And in 2019, Old Town Road from Lil Nas X actually dethroned them, and it was the #1 for 19 consecutive weeks. So we can go from the Beatles to Lil Nas X, then we must change too. But it takes courage to change. And what I want to do is, again, just a little side note, about 10 weeks ago, I called Susan and I said, all right, we're all in, we're doing the meeting. I said, how many people are signed up? She goes, well, we have like 10. I said, uh-oh, that's not good. I said, how many vendors? She goes, well, we got more vendors than people. She goes, well, that's probably really not good. And then a couple weeks went by, how many people now? We got 32. We have 32 people signed up, and but now we've got like 30 vendors. And then a couple more weeks went by, we're getting really close, and then we started to see this exponential rise, where we ended up having more exhibitors than we've ever had at this meeting. So again, let's give them an applause. So thank you for supporting that. And I think we have 120 registrants that have signed up for the meeting. So again, I want to give you guys a round of applause because it took courage for you to come here. We just got done having a ton of change, and there's still people, this is still a smaller meeting than we normally have, but again, it took you guys courage to get here, so I just want to commend you and thank you for doing that. And then almost last, we have some unbelievable speakers, and I know that they've prepared a lot of presentations that, again, I want to encourage you, when you go to their talks, I want you to get curious. And when you're curious, go just ask yourself, what can I do? How is this going to help me? How is this going to make my business better? Then I want you to get knowledge. I want you to go, what am I going to go learn? And then the last thing is, we got to commit. We're going to have to do something with that knowledge. And don't worry, if it doesn't work, then you can do it all over again. You can break it and change it. So I'm going to encourage you to write your own song. The Rolling Stones wrote Give Me Shelter in 1969. It became one of their most iconic songs, or Give Me Shelter, and yeah, most iconic songs. And again, it was based on this dark time in the late 60s. And so we just went through a crazy, tumultuous time as well. So I'm going to encourage you to write your new song for your business, for your mobile home parks, for your personal life, whatever that is. And I kind of want to leave you with this. So I graduated from high school in 1982. Like I said earlier, 1978 from about all through the 80s, that's my genre. That's the kind of music that I like. So, and particularly, you kind of break it down, I'm an 80s rock fanatic. So I like 80s rock. The problem is that if I hear a song from the 30s, 40s, or 50s, or 60s, or 70s, it doesn't really resonate with me. But if a cover band from the 80s, can take that song and bring it into the future for me and make it sound like an 80s rock song, I feel like, yeah, this is my song. I like this. So I don't particularly, again, I don't pick genres in terms of years, but I pick, if it's got that upbeat rhythm, if it's that 80s rock sound, I absolutely love it. So I'm going to conclude with this. I'm going to play Give Me Shelter, but not from the Rolling Stones. It's from an 80s rock band. I'm going to encourage you. I'm dead. I'll just yell. Guys, write your new song. Put your pants on one leg at a time. And when you do, make a gold record. And really explore the studio space, because I'm telling you, when you do it, it's messy in the beginning, but it always, for us, has led to a great result. And I got to have more cowbell. I got a FEVA, and the only prescription is more cowbell. So enjoy the meeting. Thank you very much. Have a great day.